everybody. Welcome to Zoom at 8. I am your host, Julie Ann Peterson with Old Capital Lending, and I am here every Tuesday night. And we have been doing this for over 4 years. My goodness,
Amazing.
we've gotten through COVID. We're now in this craziness, and you are still here. So, man, oh man, thank you everybody for joining me. This is the place to be every Tuesday night. You can fill up your Rolodex with people that you may not know. We network and learn from industry experts. And tonight is going to be phenomenal because we have the famous mad scientist. Yes, himself is here, Neal Bawa. So if you guys are not familiar with Neal, you are up for a real treat. Tonight, I am super excited to have Neal Bawa here. This is his second time in the Zoom at 8 studios. And I'm just so delighted that you said yes, Neal. So Neal, if you don't know Neal Bawa, he is CEO and founder of UGro and Grocapitus. These are two commercial real estate investment companies. Neal's companies use cutting edge real estate analytics technology to source and acquire, or he'll build large commercial properties across the US for nearly 800 investors. His current portfolio is over 4,800 units that has an AUM, which means upon completion, these will be over $1 billion. So we've got a real rock star in the house with us. Neal speaks at dozens of real estate conferences across the country and virtually, meaning just like this on Zoom. Over 5,000 investors attend his multifamily webinar series each year, and hundreds have attended his Magic of Multifamily boot camps. And I'm here to tell you, that is one of the finest boot camps that are out there. You must attend this. His Facebook and meetup groups have tens of thousands of investors. He's also going to be at our Old Capital Speaker Series on May 17th. That is like right around the corner between 6 and 9. We've got him for 3 hours. So this is just a warm up for all of you.
It's a teaser.
It is a teaser. So listen, I got to spend this weekend with Neal, and I've heard so many amazing things that he is going to share with us tonight. He is known as the mad scientist. He is data driven for all us geeky and nerdy investors. He is the guy you want to look up to and consult with and really understand why he does what he does. So I am having the great pleasure to introduce you all. This is a live conversation. You're in the room. You're in great company with Neal Bawa. Neal, good evening. How are you?
Fantastic. And thank you for having me back at Zoom at 8. I have great respect for what Old Capital does. Julie and Paul and the gang. I've learned so much from them over the years. They provide such an incredible amount of content. It is not easy to keep a community like this going for 4 years. That the investment of time and effort is very substantial. A lot of people have tried to do it and failed, but Old Capital is, they've been persevering. They've been providing incredible amounts of information to investors. I think that you can see that Julie is a connector. Like, that tip that she just gave us about the chat. I've been in hundreds of these Zoom meetings. I didn't know that until today. So thank you, Julie, because that's amazing. Sometimes I'm in sessions with 200, 300 people, and I don't know how to get that information and go back to, oh, who was that person that said something interesting that I want to go back to and connect with. So I'm super, super happy to be connected with you. Some of you may be passive investors, but what I'm going to do is as I do my presentation, by the way, this is one of those presentations that you can stop me and we can have a conversation. We can go on a segue. I like that. This is a smaller group. When I was at the conference at BSV Con, I was presenting to about 350 people. That was last week. Julie was there. So it's nice to have a more engaged sort of smaller group that asks questions. So feel free to do that. I'm going to focus this more for people that are either in the business of real estate or in the business of multifamily. So either way, that you're the primary audience that I'm going to be talking with today. But don't worry, if you're a passive investor, you'll get lots and lots of useful information out of this presentation. What I wanted to point out were three key economic data points that I want you to keep track of for the next 12 months. We are at an inflection point. We're in a challenging time frame. And so this presentation is called three key, I should say, critical economic data points that could impact your multifamily business, your real estate business, both in 2023 and in 2024. So I'll show some slides, but then I want to have a conversation. There's a couple things that Julie and I talked about at the conference that we'll definitely bring up at the end. I may not have slides for them, but I think that it's unique data points that we really need to talk about. And we must talk about what's happening in the banking sector and how it's going to impact your loans in the coming six to 12 months. So with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen.
And before, just some housekeeping, everybody, if you would give your attention to Neal, you go up to the right-hand side. There are 9 little dots. If you would click on that and give them your speaker view, that'll make it a lot easier. So
yep.
You're on, go for it.
Awesome. All right. Well, you've already learned quite a bit about me. I am a mad scientist. I'm, a computer science graduate that is interested in all things data. And I like to apply it to lots of different things. I don't just apply data to real estate. I apply data to everything in my life. And I buy and build large projects. So 31 projects, 900 investors, and the portfolio is about 4,800 units. And you can see it's a mix of both older projects. You see some here that are clearly older projects, and then you can see a bunch of them that we built out ourselves. So we are developers that are also doing value add. So we're developers first. We've had quite a bit of success. And again, this is more of a savvy group. You're not a passive investor group. So all I'll say is this webinar is for educational purposes only. And so make sure that you're aware of all of your risks. All right, before I talk about the 3 top economic indicators, I'm going to warm you up. I'm going to warm you up with some big picture indicators, right? So what are the big wigs in the world economy worried about today? Because this is a time to worry, right? This isn't the US. This isn't real estate. These are risks for the entire damn world, as ranked by the big chiefs of the financial world. And as you can see, in the top corner are the big 3, right? So 2 red circles and a blue one. The big shots are worried about energy, the cost of living crisis, and rising inflation. These are the 3 big ones that they're worried about, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And based on that, 3 companies went out there, Goldman Sachs, Deloitte, and Forbes. They read through 500 articles and reports and podcasts and interviews, and they gave you these insights. These are absolutely amazing. This one I for sure believe in. The Russia-Ukraine war, unfortunately, will not end in 2023, and because of that, energy is likely to remain expensive. Now, interest rates are likely to peak in 2023, and inflation will begin to cool off, but read this part. It's going to remain above target levels. Anyone that thinks that inflation is going to go back down to 2% by the end of this year doesn't understand macroeconomics, right? And there's a few others here, but here's the one that I'm going to talk about. Global recession risk is extremely high. And while there's a possibility that the US may avoid it, that's a small possibility, a tiny possibility. So with that, I'm going to talk about my 3 indicators. Now, it's clear that anyone today has to talk about the inflation indicator, but the devil is in the details, right? And as you can see, this is, I updated this yesterday. Overall, the inflation picture is getting better. Look, it's a clear indicator that there's a decline in inflation. Well, by the way, I love this movie poster. Check this out on the right. They even put the name of all the Fed governors at the bottom in The Return of Inflation. I don't know who's creative enough to do these posters, but I steal them. Anyway, while it is now clear that US inflation has crested, thank God, right? The big question is, will it get back to 2%? Because those Fed governors, the ones on the right, they've shown they don't give a damn about the stock market. They don't give a damn about the real estate market or the crypto market. They only care about getting inflation down to 2%. An economist after economist is warning us. It takes a long time to do that. So we're all going to be living with higher inflation longer than we think. And you have to think about, what does that mean for my real estate business? Why so long? Well, the answer is nothing to do with the US, nothing to do with the Inflation Reduction Act. It's just geopolitics. 2022 had the second highest oil and gas shock since the 1970s. Putin's war took the inflation that was created by that COVID supply chain, and then it turbocharged it, right? So you get massive food inflation, you get massive energy inflation everywhere in the world. And I'm not going to get into a red versus blue debate. I know I'm broadcasting from a blue state to a very red state, maybe not as red as it used to be. Texas used to be very red. Without getting into that debate, I can tell you this. The data tells me that inflation is not a US problem, right? Helicopter money didn't create our inflation. It's clear that supply chains created it. It's clear that Putin's war did. Dozens of countries that didn't print any money during COVID are facing it just like us. In fact, half the world has double-digit inflation. I want you to take a look at the chart on the right. We as Americans love to whine about our 6% inflation. This is what people are dealing with. Anyone want to live in Zimbabwe or Lebanon or Venezuela? Not me. I'm going to take the US, political dysfunction and all. I'm not going anywhere else. And a lot of that inflation is coming from an energy crisis. The world is in the midst of the first truly global energy crisis. And these are impacts that are going to be felt for years to come, possibly decades to come. Now, the chart on the left actually shows something that none of you would agree on. We are actually hurting the least of any country. In this chart, light purple is good. We are especially good. It's dark purple that's in trouble. Europe is in trouble. On the right here, you can see Europe's natural gas up 6x in a year, not 6%, 600%. Electricity up 78%, total energy prices up 2x, all in a single year. And we've seen relief at the pump in the US in the last 3 or 4 months, but that relief is not going to last, people, because you can expect prices at the pump to go up later in 2023. Because inflation is like that old Paula Abdul song that I used to sing in the 1980s. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It just takes a long time for inflation to go away. It's not a one-way process. It's been going down nicely, but at some point it's going to start ziggy-zagging. And you're going to see that in the second half of the year. And the Federal Reserve, they really know that if inflation expectations become anchored, meaning people start believing that inflation is going to be here to stay, and by the way, we are at serious risk of doing that, then we could be then in for a decade of higher inflation, right? The last time we had serious inflation, do you know how many years it lasted? 10, 1974, 1984, 10 years, because inflation got anchored. And you can see inflation is getting anchored. It's affecting every part of our economy, right? At the bottom right, you can see I've even stopped eating salad because now I have lettuce prices to blame. But seriously, we are in a very narrow window to get inflation down before wages go up permanently. So this is something that is really sobering. And here's a sobering chart, by the way. What it's saying is that the green dotted line, this green dotted line is the point at which GDP, or gross domestic product, doesn't cause high inflation. So it doesn't help it, it doesn't cause it, it doesn't make it worse, it doesn't make it better. So that green line is where we have to get to. And right now, we're where the red line is. And economists believe that for us to get from the red line to the green line, that's a 2% fall, as you can see here, 2%, right? Do you know what that means for us? In Q1, our GDP, our gross domestic product, rose by 1%. So if you have to go from here, 1%, down 2% to get inflation down, doesn't that mean you're going to be at -1? That's the definition of a recession. So we believe very strongly that there's going to be a recession. Please note that there is no past precedent in history. I've looked at everything since World War II. There is no precedent of inflation falling sharply without a sharp decline in GDP. So if you're thinking that somehow inflation is going to keep declining without a sharp decline to GDP, what you're actually saying are those 4 famous last words. This time it's different. We don't believe this time is different. You can get inflation down from 9% to 6% with interest rate cuts, but to get from 6 to 3, 6 to 2, we believe that economic activity, GDP, has to fall. So a recession is a certainty. Let me go to the next slide here. There we go. Now, here's an interesting thought. Most people think of inflation as a wealth destroyer, and they're right, except inflation is not just a wealth destroyer, it's also a wealth creator. right? So everything evens out. As the cost of stuff goes up, the value of the dollar goes down. So inflation actually transfers wealth from savers to borrowers. And I'm in a room filled with people who want to borrow. When inflation is high, that transfer of wealth is also faster. So if inflation remains at 8%, you can see from the stuff right here that the stuff is going to cost 216% more just in 8 years. So if inflation's at 8%, in just 8 years, stuff is going to cost 216% more. So it's going to double. Not saying inflation will be that high for that long, but even if it's half that high, for half that long, stuff's still going to cost a lot more. So while it makes no sense for me to buy anything exactly at this point, at some point, this chart and the logic of this chart is going to apply. All right. So before I move on to my second indicator, I do want to share an important graph. You know, people come to these kinds of webinars and they're like, what should I be screenshotting? This is the most important slide of my presentation. When you're talking to your limited partners, when you're trying to convince them to invest in a high inflation environment, if there was a single slide that you wanted to show them, it's this one, right? This graph is split in two. The left side of the graph, right, that portion that's in here, shows rent growth during a period of high inflation from 1974, right here, to 1984. Now, history shows very clearly that when inflation spikes, rents spike, right? It's super clear. Look at this. Normally, rents are at about 3% a year, 2 to 3% a year. So before 1974, they used to be actually at 2% a year. Do you know what these numbers are? This one here is 6%. This one here is 12%. So shockingly, during inflation, rent growth was 3 to 6 times higher. And that's normal. That's completely normal. So when there's people, some of you have told me that when inflation is high, rent growth cannot be high. And when they think about that, I'm like, I'm completely shocked. It's like, you couldn't possibly be more wrong. Now, a lot of people are saying, yeah, but in the last year, we've had 0% rent growth and inflation has been at 6. Yeah, but you've got to look at what rent growth was at the year before. It was 15. So we had the highest, greatest rent growth in the history of this country in 2021. Well, there had to be a breather. And that's what we're doing. We're taking a breather. But in general, there is massive amounts of evidence. Just this graph is clear evidence that when there's high inflation, there's high rent growth. And so there's high rent growth in front of us if there's high inflation. If inflation comes back down, good for you. You get low interest rates. If inflation stays high, you get high rent growth. You're going to end up having one or the other. And I think both are pretty good scenarios for people buying real estate. All right, so this first indicator, what do I look for, right? What am I looking for? So number one is I want you to look for the Fed to stop hiking in May or June of this year. So the Fed has two upcoming meetings. One is in May, one's in June. We think that there's a very high chance that they will hike in May. But we hopefully do not want them to hike in June because that really affects our multifamily business, really affects real estate, even single family real estate. If they hike both times, then you're going to see some serious jeopardy in the multifamily business because we're on the precipice right now of things breaking. And I think we can take one more hike, but if we get two in June and they still continue hiking in August, there's no July meeting, then we are in serious trouble and you need to be very careful. The second one is the rate of unemployment. There's actually no data that suggests that we can get inflation down at an unemployment rate that's under 4%. Does anyone know what unemployment was in March? Any guesses? Anyone?
375.
3.75, close enough. 3.5. So inflation in March was at 3.5. Unemployment was at 3.5%, which is just shockingly low level. So I'm really, really crossing my fingers that in the next 2.5 months, inflation falls. Unemployment rises to 4%, because I can tell you the Fed won't stop under 4%. At 4, they might start thinking about stopping. So watch the rate of unemployment. It is completely tied to my first indicator, which is inflation. It's going to be extremely, extremely difficult to kill inflation if the unemployment rate doesn't go up above 4%. All right, let's move on to to indicator number 2, home prices. And you're like, what? We're a bunch of multifamily dudes. This is a multifamily meetup. What are you doing with home prices? And my answer is, it is absolutely connected, right? Home prices are are hugely important. The multifamily industry is part of the overall housing industry. It cannot exist in a vacuum, right? So what we really need to do is we need to dive into this indicator. Now, every year my company gathers single family home price forecasts and then presents them to thousands of investors. This year we were so obsessed, we didn't want to be accused of cherry picking. So believe it or not, we gathered information from 21 different forecasters this year. You can see how obsessed I am, right? And the range, as you can see, is from 5% price growth to 22% price decline. Only these four of the sources predicted price increases, right? And the remaining 17 predicted a price decline, right? So no one had a freaking clue, but we're pretty sure home prices are not going up 5%. They're likely to drop. So let's figure out why this is so important to the multifamily investors that are in this room. All right. So far, home prices have fallen 5%, which has been shockingly good. I personally expected them to fall in the 10 to 12% range. So home prices have done really, really well. Does anyone know why? Is there, like, if you had to come up with one speculation on why home prices have only dropped 5%, even though interest rates have more than doubled, what would your one speculation be? Give me one reason.
People already inventory.
Two people said together. Let's try again.
Lack of supply.
Lack of supply,
Shortage
okay.
of, shortage of housing is what Jerry
Shortage of
says.
housing.
Low
Yes.
supply, says Chris.
Anyone
People
else?
locked in low interest rates already. They don't want to sell.
Bingo, bingo. While all of those others are true, the reason why home prices are not falling like multifamily is simply because 99% of single family homes in the United States are locked in at sub 4% 30-year fixed rates. That's what's causing the low supply. Nobody wants to let go of their property. They're locked in on an ultra low rate. At this point, if they want to sell, they're just renting it out. That's what's causing the low supply. So single family has something amazing that multifamily doesn't have: massively locked in interest rates. All right, having said that, prices are dropping in markets. These are the top 20 markets where prices are dropping. Remember, double-digit drops can turn rent growth negative for as long as a year. So I want to point out to you why I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to start giving you hints, and the answer is it's the rents, right? I'm going to skip the super expensive West Coast markets because people in this room, you don't invest there. I'm going to go straight to Phoenix, Austin, Las Vegas. These are three pretty popular markets for this crowd. Well, Phoenix home prices down 10.5%. And yes, Phoenix rents are dropping. Austin home prices are down almost 10%. Austin rents are slowing, but haven't dropped yet. I invest there, so I'm watching it closely. Las Vegas rents have dropped a tad bit, though the rental market is a bit stronger than Phoenix. Look at the second column: Raleigh, Dallas, Charlotte, Nashville, Jacksonville. These are all markets that this group invests in. And I would call all 5 of these on my watch list. And I'm going to tell you when you're going to see rent growth turn negative in these markets. And that is 12%. I want you to write this down. If rent growth from peak for any market in the United States drops 12%, we see negative rent growth. So track these home prices, my friends. And there is a place where you're safe, and that is the Sunshine State. Florida markets don't seem to be seeing any declines. I mean, you can see 17 to 20% home price increases in 3 Florida markets this year. So from the perspective of this number, if you're looking to buy multifamily in Florida, you might be safe for the moment. So far, those markets are doing better, but we'll see how they continue to do. So far, every month I track Florida numbers, and every month I am amazed by what Florida's doing. And the reason, of course, is on the right. So during COVID, we saw this massive numbers of people coming in from New Jersey and New York, and then some of them went back after COVID. Well, it seems like they didn't actually like it when they went back. And so people that went back to New York are now going back to Florida for a second time. And so we're seeing record number of U-Haul prices. So if you want to rent a U-Haul from New York to Florida right now, you just have to sell a kidney. Okay, to me, this is the most important slide of this presentation. Well, second most important. I showed you the first one. This is the second most important. And remember, you want to screenshot something for your LP investors to show them to raise money. Hopefully you're raising money for me. This is the slide to show them, right? So as a landlord, as a rental investor, we intuitively understand that the monthly payment for a home, if it's lower or equal to the rent, then people will buy homes. And if the monthly payment is higher or much higher than the rent, then people are going to choose to rent. So every real estate investor, especially you guys, should be obsessed about knowing where is that rental payment versus mortgage payment dynamic to figure out whether you should be investing in rental real estate. And today, my friends, that dynamic is massively in favor of landlords. Just look at the chart on the right. The gap between rents at the top, right? Mortgages at the top and rents at the bottom is the highest in history. The second highest was in 2005. So you see it right here. But look at this. This is almost double that number. And you might say, yeah, but home prices are falling. No, but they're falling by a very, very small amount. They're falling very slowly. And interest rates are continuing to go up. The Fed's going to raise again in May. They're going to raise again in June. So this gap is going to increase. And so what's happening is home prices are falling really slowly, but interest rates are going up really fast. So the gap is ironically going to increase in May compared to in June compared to where it is in May. It's actually going to increase. So this is enormous. 57% difference in monthly payment for a new purchase compared to average apartment rent. Every limited partner that you have must know this number. It is the widest gap on record. And that's your opportunity, my friends. That's what you're telling your limited partner investors in 7 different ways. And because of that, renters are now renting for longer. This table is stunning, by the way. Show it to your investors. It shows the income needed to buy a starter home. You know, those 50-year-old 2-bedroom crappy homes, right? Those starter homes, right? So just in the last 2 years, the amount of salary needed to own a home in Tampa, Florida has gone up from 32,000, remember that starter old home, small home, to 72,000. That's 123% more. Who got 123% raise in the last 2 years? Nobody. Austin, 116% more. If you're thinking I'm cherry picking, look at the last line. In the United States, you now need to make 88% more money to own a starter home compared to 2 years ago. No one is making 88% more. So guys, here's what's happening. This slide is about a tragedy. There are 20 million American families that would have bought a home before COVID. These are people with incomes in the 70,000 range that can't afford to buy it. I know this bottom slide says 64, but please take a look at these boom markets. Look at these numbers. If you don't have this income, you can't afford a starter home, the kind that you have to fix up with tens of thousands of dollars and lots of elbow grease. 20 million American families will never buy a home, which means that they will live in your apartments. So indicator 2, what do you want to look for? Number 1, I want to make sure that in your market, whatever market you care about, because it's so all over the place, right? There's still, home prices are still increasing in many markets in the US. Make sure that your market, its price decline from peak stays below 12%. Now, how do you figure this out? Google. Dallas home price decreases. Austin home price decreases. Houston home price decreases. In the first couple of articles, you'll know what the peak was. Zillow is another good place because you can go in and type in Zillow home values Dallas, Zillow home values Houston, whatever it is that you're putting it in there, and it'll give you a chart. And you mouse over the chart, look at the top number, mouse over the number now, and make sure that the difference is not more than 12%. I can tell you if it's more than 12% in any market, rents go down. And they start to go down pretty rapidly. I've done this, done this analysis, and you don't necessarily want to be buying in a metro that has dropped more than 12% in terms of home prices, because essentially what happens is home prices start to compete with you. Because investors at that point in time start to jump into that market and buy single family homes and rent them out because the investors are not going to live in those properties. And so the home prices start to compete with you. So keep that in mind. Now, here's the other one, 30-year fixed mortgages. Home prices are very, very sensitive to 30-year fixed mortgage rate. If the rate goes higher than 7%, it's going to cause big declines in home prices. That's going to affect your rents negatively. So you do not want, and so keep your fingers crossed, that home price, that mortgages do not go above 7%. Where are they today? I looked at it yesterday. Yesterday it was 6.48%. So far it's been doing okay. They went above 7 for like a month, 2 months, and then they came back down. And so keep an eye on it. We do not want mortgage rates in the US to go over 7%. It really impacts the multifamily market. All right, the last one, unsurprisingly, is cap rates. We're going to talk about cap rates. I mean, cap rates really impact everything. And I know that there's a few passive investors in here who don't know cap rates. So cap rates are just a measure of how much we want to pay for a multifamily property or a hotel or self-storage. As cap rates go down, prices go up. So as you can imagine, prices have been going down. So cap rates have been going up. All right, I want to guess. What is the increase in cap rates in the United States from peak? How many basis point or percentages have cap rates in the US increased? Anyone? Come on, come on.
100
One,
basis
okay,
points.
or 100
200
basis points, okay. All
We
right,
got 1.3. We got 2.
1.3. We got 2. All right, okay. Well, the winner is 1.3 right here in the Commercial Observer. The average going in cap rate increased by only 23 basis points in the first quarter of 2022. So it's slowing, the increase is slowing. The 3 preceding quarters saw going in cap rate increases of 39, 36, and 38 points. So pretty consistent, 39, 36, 38, and now slowing at 23. The total of these 4 numbers is 136 basis points. 1.36% increase in cap rates. For those of you that don't know cap rates, this equates to a price decline of slightly over 20%. So 21, 22% is 136 basis points and dropping. Now, there's this feeling, and I hear about this in meetups all the time. It's like the worst is behind us. The Fed's going to, stop raising. Fine. Let's assume the Fed stops raising in May. Okay. There's this feeling among some people that if the Fed says, fine, we're done, we're not going to raise anymore, cap rates are going to flatten out. That's absurd. That is ridiculous. Because don't you understand? What the Fed is doing is they're taking a stone. Imagine a stone that's 100 pounds. Now, imagine them putting that stone on your chest. That's what the Fed's doing. They're putting a stone on your chest. It's 100 pounds. And now you're laboring to breathe. And then every month they come and add another 10 pounder on top of the stone, right? 10 pounds, 10 pounds. Now, what if the Fed stops putting those 10 pounders in? Don't you still have 150 pounds on your chest, right? Aren't you still laboring? So anytime the Fed funds rate, which is now at 5%, is above 3%, it puts incredible pressure on cap rates to go up. Right now at 5, it's putting a ridiculous amount of pressure, and you're seeing very consistently 36, 37, 38, 23 points. The cap rate's increasing, prices are dropping. There is zero evidence, mathematical evidence in all of my studies that says that simply by the Fed stopping interest rate hikes, the cap rates are going to recompress. They are not. Next month, prices will be lower this month. The month after, they'll be still lower. The month after, lower. You get my point. Until the Fed starts to cut interest rates, cap rates are going to continue to uncompress, which means prices are going to continue to fall. So the big question you might want to ask yourself is, Neal, when do you think that the Fed will start cutting rates? Well, with unemployment, unfortunately, refusing to go up, I don't think that the Fed cuts until December, which means that between now and December, every single month, multifamily prices will fall. And you can see all of these people that are in the industry talking about this. This guy actually was the one that came closest because I couldn't really find good quotes from people. And then I eventually had to find that Observer article to research because that article was the only one that gave me specific numbers for each quarter. So cap rates have definitely moved up, right? Now, there's also this belief, and I hear this lots of Kool-Aid drinking that goes on in multifamily, meetup groups. So firstly, there is no upper limit on cap rates. There is no point at which institutional capital that has trillions of dollars sitting on the sideline is going to flood the market. That is complete nonsense. It is stuff that we've been telling ourselves for the last 12 months. Where is that institutional capital? On the sidelines. If rates go up further, where is that institutional capital going to be? On the sidelines. When is that institutional capital going to come up? Well, when prices go down. They don't give a damn about, how high the interest rates are. They will wait until the math makes sense. Does the math make sense for multifamily today? No, absolutely not. I mean, anyone who's underwriting today has to be highly bullish, which is why I've been waiting. I've only started making offers in the last few weeks, and I'll tell you exactly why I've made offers, by the way. And yes, I am confessing to you that I'm making offers in the last few weeks while my underwriting doesn't make sense. But I'm going to explain to you why I'm making offers, okay? But at the moment, my underwriting doesn't make sense. And yours doesn't either. So you can either delude yourself and say your underwriting makes sense, or just understand that we are in a reasonable, in a crazy environment. So on the screen on the right, what you see here, 75 is very difficult, but another 50 basis point drop could be seen. When do I think multifamily will get to the bottom? End of this year, maybe even in Q1 next year. And that could actually get pushed back based on what happens with the banking system. All right, cap rates. Here's some tips, right? You might say, so Neal, I mean, you're a bloody hypocrite. You're telling me your underwriting doesn't make sense, and you're still telling me that you're making offers. Yes, because here's what I believe is going to happen, right? There are two kinds of lending. Today, everyone's looking at fixed lending, right? Fixed loans. But all this money, this shit ton of money that we made our investors in the last 5 or 6 years, it all came from something called bridge loans, right? Which I think pretty much here understands that 90% of the projects that made that humongous amount of money were bridge loans. Now, the bridge market doesn't really exist today. But it's not to say you can't get a bridge loan, but they're just too expensive. Now, so think about why are bridge loans expensive? Because a bridge loan has two components. It has two pieces. So look at my hands here, right? So the piece at the bottom is what is known as the Fed funds rate. Remember, every time the Fed raises a quarter point, that Fed funds rate goes up. In the industry, we call that piece SOFR, S-O-F-R. Some people call it LIBOR. But what essentially it is the rate that the Fed lends to banks. That's the first piece. We call it the foundation. The piece that sits on the top of it for bridge loans, not for fixed loans, for bridge loans, is called the spread. So look at my hand. So the spread goes up and down. It varies. When the market sees no risk, the spreads are small. When the market sees risk, the spreads go up. When the market sees crazy stuff like this, the spreads go completely insane, which is why the bridge market doesn't exist today. But the bridge market comes back as soon as the lenders start to believe that the Fed is done. This is very important. This only works for bridge loans, by the way. It doesn't work for fixed loans, because fixed loans are basically the Fed funds rate, which is 5% right now, plus some commission on top for banks. The banks still have to make money, so you get fixed rates in the 5.5%, 6% range all day long, if you have the right property. But the bridge rates are ridiculous. The spreads are as much as 400 basis points right now, and normally the spreads are pretty low. I mean, you can even get 100 basis point spreads. Now, a lot of you are like, yes, but the Fed has to reduce rates for the spreads to come down. No, the Fed simply has to say that they're done. They can keep their rate where it is, but the spreads start to decline once the lenders don't see risk, and the lenders don't see risk as soon as the Fed stops. So here's why I am putting properties in contract. The underwriting doesn't make sense, but I want to take advantage of the fact that I think in June, the Fed will stop. They'll raise 25 basis points in May. They'll raise it in June. But what the lenders care about is not the fact that the Fed raised rates in June. They will care about the language that the Fed uses at the end of that meeting. This language, or the dot plot, is what all of the lenders, all the big lenders in the US look at. And it allows them to tell when the Fed is stopping. The moment Fed stops, the next month or the next month after that, the spreads should collapse. When the spreads collapse, the bridge market comes back. And we've had a bridgeless market for the last 12 months. And I want to be somebody that is in contract on a property with the ability to keep, paying another 25 or 50 grand to keep pushing the closing down. And then when bridge loans come back, I absolutely will get a bridge loan. I am shameless. Everyone else is saying, go get a fixed loan. I'm saying that didn't make you any money in the last 5 years. You're just saying that because your investors want to hear that. I'm telling you, I can convince my investors that the right way to go is bridge loans. They're just too high right now. So I'm betting that while I'm in contract, those bridge rates are going to come down. And if I'm wrong, I'll just, put my head between my knees and go out and get that fixed rate. And then basically I'm going to sit there for 7 years on a property that isn't going to make much money. That's what I think you should be looking for with cap rates. Now, you can clearly see I'm a geek, dork, nerd, whatever you want to call me. And I would love to partner with you. This is really more of a partnering group. Some of you are investors. So here, for those of you that are passive investors, if you want to learn more about geeky projects, feel free to zap that link that is on your left. If you're more interested in raising money for my projects, various kinds of projects, then you might want to zap that one on the right. and I'll be happy to have conversations with you. I have multiple projects that are available for equity partners right now. I have multiple projects that are available for passive investors right now. So my value add projects are like everybody else. How am I different? Data science. In 2016, I was talking about Provo, a city in Utah that nobody knows about. I went there, I built a bunch of buildings, I bought a bunch of buildings. In 2021 and 2022, Provo was rated #1 in the United States by Milken Report, which is the most powerful report that comes out in January every year. 5 years after I started talking about it. If you Google Neal Bawa 2018 Opportunity of Corridor, you'll notice an article that I wrote in 2018 about a corridor that runs from north of Orlando to south of Tampa. And I'm sure you'll immediately see a whole bunch of cities that you know about today that you couldn't have possibly known about in 2018. My data science keeps me roughly 18 months ahead of everyone else. In fact, I've started to notice that the schools in the United States that teach multifamily are now copying my slides, which I'm fine with, because by the time I show those slides, I've already made my purchases. So I'm completely happy with them, 100 other students buying properties after I've moved into a metro. So metros that I care about are places that you probably never heard of. Places like Punta Gorda, places like Rogers, Arkansas, places like Logan, Utah, or Idaho Falls, Idaho. That's what I care about. That's where I invest in, because data science shows me those places growing 3 to 4 times faster than the big cities. So if you're interested, and by the way, same value add project, same forecast as everybody else, but I think we can beat our returns, and we've beaten them year after year after year. We also do a lot of new construction projects, built to rent, townhomes. This is a townhome, by the way, that I built. And we built them in 10 different states in the US. And here you can see some more of the townhomes that we built. One other thing that we can do to monetize your database, I know you have a database of investors, is that you can sell our townhomes, our duplexes, and our fourplexes to your investors. Not every investor wants to invest in a syndication. A whole bunch of them don't want to give you a 30% split, but lots of them want to buy properties, and you can make money selling those properties to them. So if you're interested in working with us, please connect with me, and hopefully you did zap that link. But if you didn't, you can connect with us at Multifamily U. I do 12 webinars in a year, 1 a month, where I talk about lots and lots of interesting things. These days, I'm more interested in weird things like the impact of artificial intelligence on the future of our planet. I'll be doing one next month on the impact of AI on real estate and our planet. I'll be doing one on the banking system crisis, which I think is just starting. I was actually talking about that when Julie walked up to me in Phoenix, so we can talk more about that. So if you're interested in those kinds of geeky webinars, of course, we talk about multifamily and single family. You can join multifamilyu.com. It's free. We do not offer paid education. We have no intention of ever offering it. There's no subscription. It's just 25,000 people that are interested in multifamily and all kinds of real estate that gather there to watch our webinars. And that's it for my formal presentation.
My
Back to Julie.
goodness, that was fantastic. I don't think you left anything out. There are a ton of questions here, and I think it's Paula who has the majority of those.
All right,
So,
Paula. Yeah, someone's listening.
Paula is in Cedar Park, Texas. So let's kind of go through these. Scrolling. Okay. Does anyone know if the U.S. is still on the petrodollar?
The short answer is, as of today, we are. 90% of all oil gets transferred in petrodollar. So I have followed this area for decades. I'm very interested. One of my favorite websites, by the way, is this one, oilprice.com. I go there several times a week, because even though I believe in renewable energy, I believe it's laughable that we are going to be replacing all of oil with renewable energy. There is actually no data that suggests that. I think what we can do is exist in a world where up to 50, perhaps even 60% of our energy can come from renewable, energy, and I'm looking forward to living in that world. But it's hilarious to think that we are going to all of a sudden stop using oil. So I go to this website pretty often. And what is clear to me is that the mainstream media, both on the Fox side and the MSNBC side, are completely deluding you when it comes to the petrodollar. So I can tell you this, understand the statement I'm about to make. The United States is in absolutely the best position when it comes to petrodollars that it has been in the last 50 years. And I'll explain why. US oil production peaked in 1972. And after that, there was a slow decline. Every year, there was a slow decline. So we went from being a country that exported large amounts of oil to being a country that, didn't export a lot. And then all of a sudden didn't export anything and then started to import. In the early 2000s, we became a net importer of oil. Now, can you imagine if you're importing a bunch of oil, your position as the petrodollar is going to weaken, right? And then something amazing happened, which is on this slide, right? Something known as shale. Shale, or horizontal drilling or fracking, started in 2008. No one believed in it. I didn't believe in it. I didn't think that anyone would ever make money. And they actually didn't for the first 7 or 8 years. But they eventually, the technology got better. The prices came down. And as part of the shale revolution, the United States today is the largest energy producer on the face of the planet. We produce more than 10 million barrels a day equivalent, BOE, and we produce an astonishingly large amount of natural gas as a byproduct of that fracking. And since Putin's war started, we've now become one of the largest natural gas exporters in the world. Why? Because we have a terminal in Louisiana that is shipping natural gas directly to Europe because Europe doesn't get any natural gas from Russia anymore. Our position, based on the fundamentals, is the strongest it has been since the 60s. And the petrodollar is stronger when the United States is strong on the world stage. This site is beautiful for reading that. Now, once you get beyond the whole concept of, well, everyone else basically doesn't want to transact in dollars, you have to understand this, that books have been written, hundreds of them, on why the reserve currency status of the world stays with the United States and why the Chinese are the least likely country in the world to become the reserve currency of the world. I can't give that to you in a webinar. I actually have a webinar that I'm writing on why the US is likely to be the reserve currency of the world for the next 30 to 40 years. A lot of it has to do with demographics. A heck of a lot of it has to do with oil. And then it has to do with our technological superiority. So a lot of people think we're losing our technological superiority to Europe. Come on, Tesla, Apple, Google. I mean, where's the technological superiority of China? All they've managed to do, and they do a really good job of it, is copy ideas from us. TikTok, Alibaba, these are copies of American ideas. That's not technological superiority. That's just good copying. And the Chinese are pretty darn good at that. There's the amount of information that I see in the media on petrodollars is ridiculous, but there just isn't a lot of data to support it. So I'll stop there, but you're welcome to come to that webinar.
Do you have a date on that yet or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
So but still working on it. It's a tough one.
Okay. Do you anticipate the US going to 40 and 50-year mortgages, and what kind of impact would that have?
I think so. I believe that this is not a US phenomenon. You're going to see 35 and 40 years become the new 30 years. There's a variety of different reasons why that is going to happen. Now, I don't see that happening until the end of this inflation crisis, which could be a year from now. It could be 3 years from now. I don't think the inflation crisis will last 3 years, but it could. But I think in the long run, we are likely to see 35 and 40-year interest rates. Yes, simply because affordability gets to the point where that becomes the only kind of product, so people will start buying that product.
Yeah, I agree. And you're speaking of home price, the residential, or are you also talking about multifamily on that?
Well, so multifamily really only, if you think about it, multifamily tends to stick to 30 years, and I don't think that they're going to go up. Notice HUD has now moved on to 35, so you can now get a 35 or a 40-year loan with HUD. HUD is not a big market for lending, but today people are beginning to realize the value of HUD. A lot of people have been shell-shocked and said, hey, I wish we had done HUD 2 years ago. So I think that there's going to be a lot of people applying for these 35 and 40-year fixed HUD loans. Otherwise, you really can only lock loans in the US for 10 years. I mean, very few lenders allow you to lock loans beyond 10 years. So I think the impact is more on the single family side. But here's the thing, multifamily is a piece of the single family market. If you start getting 35, 40-year loans on the single family side, there's going to be pressure to do more of those loans on the multifamily side.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. All right. So secondary and tertiary markets, are they prone to higher cap rate increases? And will you continue to see potentially them taking longer to decrease?
Normally, when you start getting towards a recession or when you see higher interest rates, secondary and tertiary markets tend to get hit more. This time it's the reverse. And the reason for that is work from home. We are not seeing secondary and tertiary markets take the hits that we thought they would. So like everyone else, I was in the camp of, hey, their cap rates are going to increase a lot more, their prices are going to drop. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing that. Some of it also was because their cap rates were never as low as the bubbly markets. When you look at cap rate changes in the US, the bubbly markets are the ones that have changed the most. So Phoenix is a market where the cap rates have changed by 150 basis points. Atlanta around 125 basis points. And there's a bunch of markets that are in that 100, 125 range. And there's a lot of regional smaller markets where we are seeing cap rates in the 75 to 100 basis points. So they're doing slightly better. Why? Because they started out in the 4s, where the bubbly market started out in the 3s.
That is insane. I would have never thought that. So interesting piece.
Yeah.
Okay, Ikungai, what do you have? You have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Neil. Nice to meet you. I had two questions. One was about, you were saying if Fed, having previously raised rates in May, if they do so in June, is going to be bad for multifamily. And I was wondering, is that bad for sellers or everybody?
Sellers.
And then,
So if it's, by June, if the Fed raises another 25 basis points in June, multifamily prices could fall almost immediately by another 10%.
okay, got you. And then my second question was about bridge loans, because I found that very interesting. It's mainly to figure out, let's say Fed pauses rates in June, right?
Yeah.
Do spreads in bridge loans, because I'm not too familiar with how fast they can fall down.
They're pretty much instantaneous. I mean, spreads, the lenders are setting spreads on a weekly basis. So they go up, they go down. I mean, mostly they've been going up for the last year because everyone's afraid. So you could start seeing some small declines immediately, but for the bridge market to truly be reactive, you need to give it, a couple months for them to drop, and people need to feel comfortable that the Fed is really done. So you might see small drops in the spread, which will help you, but for bridge to really come back, you need to see large drops. And I think that could take several months. So it could be August, September, where you start seeing bridge loans. By October, if the Fed stops in June, by October, you're going to be hearing, oh, the bridge market is back. Everyone's going to be talking about the bridge market's back.
All right.
Okay.
Now, I know that there's a lot of office that is not being used. A lot of people aren't going back. And that is definitely going to be affecting the banks, the banking industry, not necessarily, obviously not an agency. What do you speculate on where office goes in the next year? And how is that going to affect the banks?
Well, it's going to go into the toilet and then it's going to dig deeper from there on. It's going to dig all the way to China. So I can tell you there is, what's protecting multifamily, sure, our prices have dropped, is our fundamentals, right? So rent growth in the US was flat, right? And you might say, well, that doesn't seem very fundamental. Well, yeah, but it was up 15% the year before that. So 0 is not a bad number. And I think you also have to consider that affordability takes time to catch up. People get, there has to be a lack of affordability and then people start getting salary increases. The good news is, salary increases in the last year have been pretty substantial, 6.5%. Usually Americans get 2% salary increases. So our problem of affordability is slowly getting fixed. And so we're waiting for the market to catch up. But our occupancy is in the 95% range. Office is 89%, and many markets are now below 80%. just so you understand, office loses money at 90%. That's how expensive office has been. So if occupancy is at 90, you're losing money. If occupancy is at 80, you're turning the keys over to the bank because you have absolutely no equity left in your properties. You know, their office values have only fallen by 10%. The big reason they've fallen by 10% is simple, because it takes, their leases are not like ours. Their leases are 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years. So it takes longer for the, so it's a slow moving debacle. It takes longer, but that debacle is going to happen in the second half of the year and the first half of next year. You're going to see incredible, shocking declines in US office values. If I had to guess, I'd say between 30 and 40%.
So you're not buying office or developing.
God, no, you couldn't hold a gun to my head to buy office. I'll wait. I mean, when it's 40% down, I'll buy it, because once it's 40% down, it's cheap enough to convert. There's a lot of people that say this, complete nonsense. It's like, oh no, they'll just convert offices to multifamily. Okay. Have you ever bothered one time to look at an office and then added on the cost of converting it to multifamily and seen what the build to cap rate is? That build to cap rate is 3 cap. Who is going to give you a loan when you're trying to do something that is built to cap at 3? No one in the United States is going to give you a loan. Everyone talks about conversions. How many conversions are actually happening?
Not many, and
No.
they're hard to get done. You know,
Yeah,
not having
it's
the
super
infrastructure in.
difficult.
Yeah.
And cities are not changing their laws. I mean, it's really difficult to convert an office building into a multifamily. Really difficult. The zoning doesn't work. They you know, all kinds of issues. Parking. I mean, come on. 1 out of 1,000 buildings can be converted. Everything else, they've got to fall 40 or 50% before we can demolish the suckers and build a multifamily there.
So we have a homeless problem in America. Is that something that we're going to see office and putting people in office space? I mean, what do you, we've got to be able to utilize this in some way. What do you, how you, there's going to be an awful lot of empty buildings.
Yeah, and that's not going to happen. So, I mean, empty buildings are not new. In between 2008 and 2012, there were lots of empty buildings. In the 1990s, there were empty buildings. After the savings and loan crisis, there were empty buildings. I don't believe that in any of those times they were filled by homeless people. Well, a few broke in, so sure. But other than that, no, I don't think that's going to happen.
So how is the current administration new rule with the higher credit score buyers subsidizing lower credit score buyers? Ooh, how is that going to affect the market? I bet you have a good answer for this.
Well,
What is
that
your
one
thoughts?
actually, I was researching today. So I'm going to say, when I come back in May, I'm going to have a clear answer on that. There's just so little data to understand what they've just done that I need a month to digest that. So I'm not going to answer that one.
Good. All right, let's take one more. It's can we repurpose office to storage, to hotel, floor to floor? Can the US possibly subsidize a conversion for in strategic locations?
No, not at all. Office tends to be around $3 a square foot. Storage tends to be around 95 cents. How do you take something that's $3 a square foot and then repurpose it to make it 95 cents a square foot? Now, hotels sometimes, yes, but I'll explain it. So because you can take a $3 per square foot downtown, office building and then turn it into a hotel in that same area, because hotels can be as much as $4 or $5 a square foot. So there's some delta there. So there's some room. Here's the problem. It's actually very, very difficult to convert an office building to a hotel for a wide variety of reasons. Basically, hotels are little boxes. Offices are open walls. So the construction cost is extremely high. The other problem is hotels are getting hit. Their occupancy is getting hit in the downtowns. If the offices are empty, who's going to live in the hotels? That's the problem. So technically speaking, office to storage, no. Office to hotel, possible. But no one's building hotels in downtowns right now because people not even sure of the future of downtowns. Remember, downtowns across the US in the 80s, 90s were blighted places. And then they made a comeback with the tech boom because the tech people could pay a lot more. Now those tech people are leaving. It's possible that office could be blighted again for the next decade or two.
Wow.
Or at least downtowns will be.
Interesting. All right. You always give us some, you talked about the smaller tertiary markets, the Idaho Springs. Can you give us maybe your top 5 markets for people to be watching? other than
Okay.
Punta Gorda, what those other ones?
Okay.
What do you got?
So I'll start with Punta Gorda. What I'm seeing is that because Florida is continuing to see massive numbers of people, the corridor on the other side of Florida, the one that people tend to talk about is, Palm Coast, Jacksonville, going down all the way to, Palm Beach and Miami. That tends to get all the sexy attention. But right now is actually a time to go down from Tampa. And all of those cities that when you go down, Bradenton, Sarasota is now expensive, so you can keep going downwards. You come across a lot of small cities. They're all going to do really, really well. So there's Punta Gorda, there's Port Charlotte, there's Fort Myers, Cape Coral. Now you might find Fort Myers and Cape Coral expensive. Well, in that case, the best place to go is go 1 mile south, and you'll come across a wonderful city called Lehigh Acres. No one has ever heard of it. I bet you in 5 years, it's going to be in all of the syndication information. Lehigh Acres. That's a great one. So I'll move from Florida. What I'm seeing in, and I'm going to just drop a map because it'll be easier for me to kind of talk to the map of the United States. I like looking at corridors. I rarely ever look at cities because what I see is the network effects are based on a corridor where 3 or 4 cities become ultra hot and then they drag everything else with them. So there's a corridor developing and it starts in Jacksonville and it's a freeway. So you can just track it along the freeway. So Jacksonville, and then it goes to Savannah, Georgia. So it's in Georgia. If there's one city that I would look at in Georgia at this point, it would be Savannah. It's inside the corridor. Now, as you continue running along the corridor, you come to Charleston, South Carolina. So I've now picked a Floridian city, a Georgian city, a South Carolinian city, all on the same corridor in the same 250-mile radius. If you keep going beyond Charleston, you'll come to Myrtle Beach, and then you will come to Wilmington, North Carolina. So of the corridors that I'm watching, I usually watch about 10 corridors. That is my favorite. And what I like about this corridor is it has 4 different states.
Amazing. Do we still watch Des Moines, Iowa?
I look at it. It's no longer in my kind of top 10, top 20. I think that they've got challenges there with the other problem is, a lot of people educated me when I talked about it. They said demographically, yes, you're right, but they've got renter laws issues that are going to, drag down your rental income. So I pulled back a little bit on Des Moines. I do think that Rogers, Arkansas is a city to watch. Anyone that, thinks, I think of Arkansas as like just a dead, empty space. I mean, just big empty space, but the numbers on Rogers are pretty amazing. Fayetteville, those are really interesting markets that everyone should really be looking at. And then there's one that is very popular in the syndication world, but I still think it's a strong market, and that is Huntsville, Alabama. So, I'm not very fond of any other city in Alabama, but I like Huntsville. And then there are a few that I've in the past made fun of. And there's Oklahoma City and Tulsa. So for various reasons, Oklahoma is doing well. They're benefiting from all the money that the government is plugging in. They're benefiting from the return of manufacturing to the United States. So if I had to pick one over the other, I'd pick Oklahoma simply because its population growth is higher. Tulsa has no population growth, but has pretty good deals.
Interesting. Okay.
And generally, I mostly talk about things like Texas and stuff like that. And I'm not very bullish on Texas at the moment because everything's so freaking expensive, right? It's hard to make money when things are expensive. I've only bought, I'm building in lots of places in Texas because, if stuff is going to stay expensive, then I might as well build. But in terms of buying, the one city that I've found consistently to be pretty awesome is Killeen. Killeen is north of Austin. So Austin, you'd think that Austin is this big green city and there's lots of things around it, but actually you can't go much in each direction. If you go south, it's expensive because you're running up against New Braunfels, which is more expensive than Austin. And then further south, you're going to run into San Antonio, so that's not going to do you any good. If you go north, well, Dallas is hundreds of miles away. The only city that's commutable is Killeen. So I like Killeen. There's a downside of Killeen, though, so institutional investors sometimes don't like investing in it, and that is because it's a military town. Right. I currently like the military. In the past I didn't, but for the moment, cheap military is good. I can tell you I've owned for about 15 months in Killeen. The property is crushing rent numbers.
Okay, so did you put any bridge on any of your deals?
Yes. So I have 2 deals with bridge, and one of those properties is losing cash. So it's losing about 50 grand a month. And my rate cap was very high, by the way. So learn the lesson there, right? I'm not one that basically says, for some reason I'm better than others. I've made the same mistakes with bridge debt that everyone else has made. No different. Luckily, I didn't buy a lot of properties in 2021 because I felt the market was very expensive. So I was jealous of practically everybody because people are buying, 2 properties a quarter. And in 2 years, I managed to buy 1 property in Killeen. And one other property that has bridge debt. So it was my own property. I bought it back, and that's the one where the bridge debt got really expensive. So losing 50 grand. Luckily, I had $800,000 in reserves. So once the reserves are gone, I will fund it with my own money. I mean, I'm not doing a cash call for one property. I mean,
And the
most
cash calls
indicators.
we'll be talking about
Mhm.
on the Old Capital speaker series. So
That's right.
that you're going to want to tune into that. Now, there was a question about why military towns, and from a lender standpoint, everybody, lenders don't like military towns because if they get deployed, then everybody leaves. Okay, so it's not good from a lending standpoint. We put
That's right.
limits on it.
That's
But,
right.
For a person like you, what would be your reason, Neal, to buy into that area other than
I'm getting cap rates in excess of 5. And I was getting those cap rates a year ago. Today you can get 6 cap. So the answer is this. Everything that Julie said makes sense, right? You're going to have a lower LTV because the lenders, and there'll be less lenders that'll be willing to lend to you, so less competition. But then right now it's just being made up on the cap rate side. If I'm getting a cheaper price, I'll deal with the lender issues. I'll deal with the fact that, every time there's a deployment, all of a sudden I lose 5, 6, 7% of my occupancy. So has that happened? Yes. There was a deployment to Ukraine. And so my clean property went from 95 to 89. And so when you buy those properties, because you're getting a big discount up front, you better plug in an extra couple $100,000 of operating buffer. And so the property was upside down for 3 months and then bounced right back. Because when people move out, guess what happens? New people move in. So 3 or 4 months later, people moved in, the property filled up. But
okay.
it's painful a bit when it happens.
It is. Okay, this is going to be our last question. We could go on all night, Neal, and you've been so generous. Talk to us about population growth, because I know that there is some student housing. Banks don't like student housing. I should say agency is a little bit leery on student housing. A lot of it is because of population growth. Can you talk to us a little bit about where we're going as a country on population and how that could be affecting some of these universities, and therefore a lot of these, I know for agency, they're looking 10 years down the road and they're seeing that maybe we're going to see some of these institutions go away.
We have to. I think that the honest answer is, if I look at the student housing market from a 10-year perspective, that market is going to be impacted. I think their cap rates are too low. Their cap rates should not be within a quarter point of multifamily. So if multifamily is at 5, student housing tends to be at 5.25. I think they should be 6 cap. And a lot of that is because student housing is built on just more and more students. It's predicated on every university adding 1 to 2% more students. And some universities are, especially in places like Texas and Florida and Georgia, where there's more growth, that's happening. But the problem is, as a country, we are slowing. The world's demographic speed is slowing. More and more countries are slowing down. You heard this a couple months ago that for the first time in its history, China lost population. So China lost a very small amount of population. It was like 700,000 people, but you never really think of the Chinese losing population, right? You're always thinking they're growing and growing and growing, but demographics catch up with everybody. And the US is a reasonably young country when it comes to demographics. A lot of our people are under 50, but having said that, our population growth is slowing. So between 2000 and 2010, our population was growing at well over 1%, which was reasonable. Now we've dropped to 0.7%. Last year was 0.2. Now, that was an odd year because of the death rate, right? Because there were significant deaths from COVID. But it's obvious that the US is now growing significantly slower. There's a lot of different reasons for that. But I think the biggest reason is simply it's expensive to bring up kids. So there's more and more one kid families or 0 kid families in the US. And that's going to have an impact on all kinds of things, including multifamily. But the student housing market is going to be impacted very aggressively and it's going to get dented much faster than multifamily. Keep in mind, all those numbers that you see, we're going to need 5.6 million apartment units by the year 2035. You see that? It's pretty common to see that number. I think it's horse shit. I think the US only needs about 1.7 million homes. That's a number from Ivy Zellman, who I think has the right number. She's doing the math correctly because she's factoring in slower population growth. 1.6 million units sounds like a lot, but do you know that 700,000 new construction units are delivering in the next 12 months? So, this magic of multifamily, it's been magical, but it doesn't mean that it'll stay magical. So you've got to stay on top of the numbers.
Oh man, that was a real teaser for this speaker series. Oh my. Neal, you've gone way beyond. Thank you so much. I'm just so grateful for the information you've
Thank you.
dropped here. Amazing. Do you want to say one more time, how do people get a hold of you?
Just send me an email, neal@grocapitus.com, or hopefully you use the barcode. If you are looking to raise equity for me, now's the time, because I'm very active at this point, having sat out the 2021-2022 debacle. So I'm very active, looking to both buy and to build. So you're welcome to connect with me, neal@grocapitus.com. Let me plug that into the chat. And then I got to go because I'm going to get fined $30 at my Pilates class.
Oh, well, we don't want you to miss out on that. So,
all right, here you go. You've got my link, and my email address is coming up. And then I'm going to sign out. Thank you, everyone.
okay. Thank you, Neal. Have a
Bye-bye.
great
Thanks,
night.
Neal.
Bye.